I'm Michael Munson with Forge, and I'm going to just do a very quick hi, you're in the right place if you're here for the webinar for Patience, Presence, and Practice Scenarios and Skills for Serving Trans Survivors. So welcome to today's webinar. We're going to give Emil a second to make sure that our interpreters are all assigned to the right places. And as we do, I just want to make sure that everybody feels welcome and get yourself a drink if you'd like to have some water, get comfortable. We're going to have a different style webinar today with some conversation, and it will be a really good time. Let me just start us off by sharing a little bit about who Forge is for folks that are not familiar with who we are. We are a trans anti-violence organization founded 30 years ago, almost 31. We do national training and technical assistance, a very small amount of direct services to trans, non-binary folks and loved ones, but the majority of our work is providing training and technical assistance and working with the majority of you who are here today, who are advocates and other folks that are working in victim services or working with survivors of violence or other folks in the trans community. Slide. We've got a couple of guiding principles, and hopefully you will see them today as we move through this time together. One is to be trauma informed, and that is something that I think we all are working hard to keep up with what that means, and that changes over time. It changes with our current culture. It changes with who we're working with, but being trauma informed is really important to us as a guiding value and principle. And the other guiding kind of force for us is to be empowerment based. We know that sometimes trainers kind of scold people or tell people what they're doing wrong. We like to help people know what they're doing right and to do more of it. So we really take that approach to the work that we do with providers, as well as obviously the work that we do with survivors. And all of that is kind of underwritten. We have the base of that being culturally responsive. We know that no two communities are the same. We all have very different realities that bring us to our current moment. And we really want to be aware of what is going on for individuals that we're working with, for cultures that we're working with systems that we're working in. And so we want to be responsive in those ways. And we know that we, like everyone else, we don't always meet those goals, but that's what we are striving for. So we want to welcome you here and welcome into the space. We're going to encourage folks today to share in the chat, and Emil and Caleb and I will do just a quick, hi, who are we before we get started into the core of this work. To kind of ground us, let me read the quote that's on the slide right now by Tabitha Gonzalez. They write, "We are essential to the fabric of this thing we call humanity." So for introductions, if folks would like to share in the chat your name and pronoun and why, what role it is that brings you here, and anything around the image that comes to mind when you think about the word support. Any of those pieces, if you'd like to share them in the chat, that's great. We probably won't be reading those out, but we will be reading out things in a little bit about your contributions in the chat. Let's, the three of us, introduce ourselves. Again, I'm Michael Munson with Forge. I'm Forge's executive director, one of our primary trainers, and I'm really happy to be with you today. Emil?
Hi, I'm Emil. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a program manager at Forge and come from a long time of working on various crisis hotlines and in the domestic violence world and domestic violence prevention. And an image that comes to mind when I think of support is like when a dog leans on you and that kind of the comforting feeling of like being leaned on and also like being somebody's kind of stable support. Caleb.
Thank you. I'm Caleb. I use he, him pronouns. I'm Forge's communications coordinator. I think what the image that comes to mind for me, I love the dog one, is about like roots and having deep connections and kind of an ecosystem of support. That's what I think of.
Excellent. Thank you. And I didn't follow the directions either. So like, I mean, I'm bad at following directions. When I think about support, it's interesting, Emil, that you brought up a dog and leaning, and Kale that you brought up roots, because when I think of support, I think about being in the woods and trees that are really old usually, and really solid and really sturdy, and being near them and feeling that energy. So thank you. And I know that people are sharing in the chat. We're going to move forward, and please engage in the chat and say hello to each other, because we want the space to be a communal space that we are all gaining from together. So a reminder that we are recording this event. We are going to be sharing only things that those of us that you see on screen are sharing verbally. We will share some things from the chat, but we won't use your name. So what goes in the recording will be nameless. So feel free to share what you feel comfortable with in the chat. We really care about your learning experience, and we know that you all are coming with different things in what you're wanting from this time together. So we know that we will trust that you will lead in your own learning, and whatever that means for you. If you need to take a break, take a break. If you want to lean in a lot and be really engaged, that's great too. Please do what you need to do so that you can get the most out of this time together. We encourage you to take care of yourself and take care of each other, however that looks for you as well. So whether that's getting comfortable physically, whether it's taking a break, whether it's doing whatever it is that you need to do, please do that. And please take care of each other in the chat, and be kind to each other, and all of those good things that help us feel okay about being in the space together. And that, of course, means to participate in whatever ways are comfortable for you. So we're going to ask for your involvement in the chat. We would love to see it, but it's also totally fine if you don't want to participate. So however you want to be in this space, be in this space. If you have specific needs, we will try to be monitoring what's going on in the chat. All three of us are going to be on screen, so may not be able to be as attentive all the time to what's in the chat, but one of us should be able to see something. If you need something, let us know, and we'll try to make that happen. We encourage folks to engage with integrity. All of the things that go with that. I'm going to leave it at that and let you all figure out what that means for you. But we encourage you to be in this space and honor those who are here with sensitivity and gentleness. And the last thing, and I know most of us don't need to hear these things, but we're going to say them anyway, just as a good reminder to us all of protecting each other's privacy. So, we encourage you to take the content of the information that is shared today, take that and share that with folks. But if people are sharing, private or confidential information, please leave their names out of that sharing with other folks, and respect their privacy by not asking intrusive questions, things like that. So that is kind of a snapshot of our time together. Emil, do you want to go to the next slide? And just one more quote before I turn things over to Emil. This is by Chase Strangio, who many of you know as an ACLU trans attorney who's been at the Supreme Court. Very, very cool person. Chase writes, I wake up every day with unending gratitude for being trans, unending gratitude for my queer and trans communities. Emil.
Thank you. And thank you all for being here. We're grateful to you and to all of our queer and trans communities. So, as Michael mentioned, today we have 3 different kind of scenarios or case studies to look at, and that we'll be talking through. And as we were designing these and talking about them, 3 kind of core skills kept coming up again and again: patience, presence, and practice. And rather than spoiling the whole training for you, I won't go into too much detail on those yet, but we'll kind of highlight those themes as they come out throughout the scenarios. And that for me, I really appreciated having these kind of frameworks because they help give me reminders of like what pieces to hold on to. There's often a lot of moving parts when you're working with a survivor or anyone who's going through some stuff, including yourselves. And so sometimes having having some structure to like how we think about what we want to do can be really helpful. So we offer this to you if it works for you. That's great. And just a little bit of kind of behind the scenes about these scenarios. So we have 3 scenarios that were created based on common themes that we hear from trans and non-binary survivors of violence. Um, we do not include in these details of or extensive details of each person's trauma history. And we made that choice in part because we know that y'all are coming from a whole bunch of different fields and places and stuff like that. And some of the themes that we hear, there are connections kind of throughout different experiences of violence or trauma. So what we wanted to do was create scenarios that could work for a wide variety of different providers and different states, different places we're in, all of this stuff, and really invite you all to think about what if this person was reaching out to you in your role. And that may mean, you add some details so that they're eligible for your services or whatever. But we're kind of giving that framework to it. And as we do each scenario, we'll be chatting through some questions. We really encourage y'all to use the chat to add in your thoughts. You can answer the questions that we are asking each other and ourselves. You can also add in additional thoughts and questions. If you have specific questions for us, please drop them in the chat, or you can use the Q&A function, whichever feels easiest for you. And you can privately chat us if you want to. The other thing I will say with these scenarios, as you have maybe assumed, since we are talking about trans and non-binary survivors of violence, is that we talk about trauma. We will talk about suicidal ideation. We may talk about and name different types of violence people have experienced, including interpersonal violence and systemic violence and oppression. So though we don't give graphic details on any of those, that content will come up throughout. And this is recorded. So again, take care of yourselves and each other. And especially, given the world we live in right now. All right. And we'll take a short break after each scenario to decompress a little bit. So let's get to it with scenario 1. Caleb, could you read this?
Yeah, so this is our first scenario from Jay, who's a Z or he pronouns. I know I've been depressed for a long time, like as long as I can remember. Some things used to help, but now I just don't like anything. I think getting a different job would help, but that's impossible. When I have gotten the energy to apply to jobs, I never hear anything back. I sent out like 100 applications last year and heard back from one. My current job sucks. It's super transphobic. I get harassed by customers all the time, and no one sticks up for me. I don't make enough to save up, but there's nothing I can do about it. There's no jobs. I don't have any skills. And even if I did, I'm too tired and burnt out to start something new. I've got fibromyalgia, and all the stress makes my pain worse. Weed helps sometimes, but no one is going to hire me with my disability, and I probably couldn't work anyway.
Yeah. I'm going to stop the share so that we can kind of talk to each other. Michael, are you able to share the handout? We'll
I
have a
was just
link.
going to share the link in the chat. I'll be right there with it.
We'll have a link in the chat. So if you want to open up a handout that has a scenario written so you can keep looking at it, feel free. And we can, share the questions and stuff. So the first question we want to talk about is, let me get the exact wording for us now that I don't have the slides anymore. Is how are trauma and culture possibly showing up? And what do you notice in this scenario? And actually, I'm supposed to get us started. Cool. So, my first reaction to this is really like, yeah, things are hard. Um, it is really hard to get a job. Jobs don't pay enough. There's not enough access needs, like 100% there with you. This is so difficult. Um, so I think just really like kind of honoring that experience of just how jobs are transphobic, they're inaccessible. There's so many barriers to employment for trans folks and for survivors who are adding on layers around possibly navigating trauma, possibly navigating having to avoid an abuser, or having disrupted job history from the abuse. And then we add on how depression can change our ability to get things done, the ways that we process stuff, um, and just add like layers and layers of extra work that this person will have to do to find employment. Um, and I also just want to name that like Jay has been trying really hard. Like I hear all of the stuff that Z has been doing, to take care of himself throughout this. Caleb, what about you?
Yeah, I think really similarly, I just hear so much exhaustion and overwhelm and all of that effort into making this current job work and kind of trying to cope with the transphobia and the harassment. Um, those layers, like you were saying, it just adds this weight that makes everything more difficult. Um, definitely as an aspect of trauma. Um, and part of that is like it's difficult to do anything to support your own mental health when the material conditions are so much of a concern. And then it's hard to work on changing those material conditions if you have that option when your mental health and your physical health are so pressing also. Um, some of the cultural elements I'm thinking of are the different kind of like connections and things we're taught in our lives around um, do we have these kind of casual connections with people who could support us in getting a job, which is a huge privilege to have access to, or having somebody who's really familiar with that job application process who could help out with that. Um, even just working at a job where the culture is supportive of trans folks um, is another one of those places. And then I just hear so much of how that depression and overwhelm is shaping Jay's perspective on all of this around like, I don't have any skills. I'm too burnt out to start over, where those things might feel like extremely true in this moment, even if there are other possibilities.
Really? And uh, as you're talking about, can back a paragraph or two about material conditions, like jobs are the main way that most of us have health insurance. And a lot of jobs don't give health insurance or don't give quality health insurance. But then how do you get medical care for fibromyalgia? How do you get mental health care? How do you get any sort of support without health insurance or without a boatload of money on your own to pay for it outside of that? So that makes leaving this current job potentially impossible without another job in place that provides healthcare. Um, and so many jobs don't start healthcare right away that like having that gap can be really difficult. So we're piling on the logistical, just like purely logistical considerations of how do I meet my basic needs, as well as all of what may have happened in Jay's life before this that can add to the trauma. So what are some ways that different roles or disciplines might offer support?
One of the main things, like you were just saying, that I was thinking of was around healthcare and mental health care, which is very challenging to access without insurance, or if the insurance part is kind of in flux. Um, what comes up for me is around like, are there ways to address like one of those layers, even if it doesn't fix, like none of this fixes the big picture and the world that we live in, but are there those smaller things that could make one part of this easier around like pain management, mental health support for depression, Um, Financial aid for healthcare access are those things that service providers could connect Jay with. Um, and then on a more general level, it's just that like listening to what Jay is needing and what Jay is showing up for and not jumping right to those practical strategies. Because my I go directly to we like healthcare support, mental health support. That might not be the primary thing that Jay is concerned about, um, or that he needs support for in that moment. Um, I also think about what resources does Jay already have and strategies that he's leaning on, um, which we hear some of that through looking for jobs, using weed as support for chronic pain, um, thinking about how those could fit into broader support.
Yeah. Um, when you said like there's that urge to jump to kind of fixing it, I um in my past work experience, I supervised economic empowerment advocates who are like the folks at domestic violence centers who are trying to help people with all things financial. And there's we want to help. And there's this tendency to be like, let's get a resume, let's show them Craigslist, let's like do the job search. I have 5 job fair handouts, go. And that approach works for so few people, especially when you're adding on layers of depression, feeling stuck where you are, um, going too quickly from like I'm stuck and frozen, like this feeling of type body to like big actions can be super hard on our bodies and our brains, and maybe just not possible either emotionally or physically or psychologically, like thinking wise. Um, so kind of being aware of what those resources are, but also taking the time to, like Caleb said, like listen to what they need and um what his first priority is. It is Jay coming to you because Z wants help figuring out how to get a new job, or help dealing with the emotions, or help with past trauma, and this is just like the presenting thing on Z's mind. There's a lot that could be happening in there. um the other role that came to mind is kind of still in that domestic and sexual violence field, um, is continuing to honor and acknowledge how trauma can impact employment, but also how abuse can impact employment. Jay doesn't mention it, but if Z is coming to me and I'm at a domestic violence center, I'm going to assume there's some history of intimate partner violence or domestic violence. Um, and that can be part of what's happening. Is an abuser also interfering with work? Is an abuser also interfering with their mental health, contributing to depression, adding on layers of transphobia? Like, so how do we kind of start incorporating what I know here from the scenario to what I know about abuse generally? Um, and I want to pause before the next question to see, Michael, is there stuff coming in the chat you want to bring in?
Yeah, there's a couple things that I thought are really additive to this discussion. One was I think we kind of talked about it already. You've both touched on it, but the just kind of the level of burnout that people are feeling, and somebody was mentioning like autoimmune flare-ups, and so many of us know that in the trans community there's like so much high levels of autoimmune things. That's my added to the comment, but just the level of exhaustion that people are feeling. Another person added about like the vulnerability of service workers or customer facing industries, and kind of what this reflects as part of their process, and kind of like where transphobia plays a role in that work connection. Um, So, a couple of people made comments about kind of like the byproduct of the circumstances and where transphobia plays a role. And then there's some beginnings of discussions about like, kind of being in the moment. And that's so right on about what we're talking about today is kind of like, how can we build rapport and be in the moment? So, and that was more adding my comments to the comments, but just those were some of the themes that I think have come out in the comments so far.
I'm gonna look next at like what are some of the long-term supports that we might offer. Um, and one is I'm thinking about some of the comments around the job and stuff is if we if my role is helping Jay with kind of that job seeking, like figuring out those next steps, um, is to make sure that like I'm aware of some of the laws and the barriers to employment. So do we live in a state with any sort of legal protections for trans folks around employment? Um, what how accessible are jobs in our area? Yeah, there's the ADA, and we know that like federal non-discrimination policies don't stop discrimination from happening. So kind of having a feel for like what sort of jobs may be better at accommodations, as well as what sort of work Jane may want if there's anything that they have interest or skills in. And I think through building a relationship and rapport with Jay over time, you can learn some of like what are his interests, what are his skills, and then start to validate those. Right now, he's saying, I don't have any skills. Um, and I don't need to be like, you're wrong right away or ever. But as I hear Jay talk about stuff, I might say, oh, you sound really great at this or that. Um, and also, if you're not super familiar with like transphobia in the work environment, it is brutal and like customer facing jobs, service provider type jobs. We heard in our recent survey on adverse experiences and hate violence. Like so many people talk about the harm at work was coming from customers, not in addition to like the bosses and management. And so um, kind of that's something to have in our minds as we're thinking about what job options there are. Another big piece is just like making things small. Again, it's really hard to go from kind of a freeze or stuck thing to a big movement. Sometimes people love it, and sometimes that can be helpful as like take a jump. But often, sometimes it's like do one little thing. What I'm capable of today is this small step. So whatever our role is, kind of helping to break things into stuff that feels more manageable, and manageable given, knowing that this person has said they have low capacity right now. Caleb, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'm thinking a little bit outside of a lot of those job focused solutions that you mentioned around what else is going on in Jade's life. Are there ways to build connections with peer support? Um, Having those kinds of social connections and thinking about what like kind of can counteract burnout, um, even if we can't change necessarily the physical health concerns or the job environment, what are those other things that bring joy or ease? Um, and how can these different service providers support those kinds of strategies? Um, I'm thinking about too, looking at this, these are systemic factors with transphobia and um, the ways that those stressors impact somebody's mental and physical health that makes it really hard for one individual person to get out of burnout. Um, and that's not something we can really do on our own. So what are those ways to build external supports? And then I think, I mean, you've covered a lot of it, but I think in general that just empathy, listening and continuing to check in about needs and priorities. Because I think if somebody's working with Jay in a long term, this job might change, um, Jay's priorities might change, and so continuing to focus on what Jay is needing, not some arbitrary idea of like what would be a better outcome.
Yeah. Mhm. What- Thinking of like the systemic stuff, it can be really helpful to name that out loud too. In my experience job searching and like almost everybody I know, it's so demoralizing. Like you send out 100 applications and you hear back from no one. And there's there's so much like, for lack of a better word, propaganda around like job applications of like hustle and get out there and put your name out there and magic will happen, that it can feel like the problem is me. And almost everyone I know who's looked for a job at some point has felt like I'm the problem. I must not be good enough. And if you're already depressed, like that really sucks to add on that feeling. So being able to name like the job market is crap right now. It's not your fault. Can be helpful, while also kind of providing a feeling of agency and like what can you do, because when the whole world is against you it's also really hard to be like what can I do. So I think a lot about like kind of finding that balance, um, with really naming the injustice. um, and I saw somebody in the chat mention spoon theory too, which is like another uh, thing that I might see if Jay is familiar with, or just what kind of support and knowledge Jay has around his disability. Like some folks, a lot of folks, especially with disabilities that are like not commonly understood by doctors, have done a lot of self-advocacy work. Um, and so I don't want to assume a lack of knowledge, but I also don't want to assume they have all the same knowledge and resources as like a disability justice expert. Um, so, checking in on like what kind of care they have, how they think about their capacity and disability, might be something to add in there. Michael, what else have we got in the chat?
A couple of things. So one person is adding about kind of looking at their capacity and like, is Jay contacting them on a kind of a crisis basis or a longer term basis? So like, as a worker, what is my role in that? Which is an interesting, kind of way to think about what's going on here. And someone else mentioned about kind of addressing confidentiality and safety planning. And when I first read this, I was thinking like, oh, they're talking about like if Jay has a job. But that's certainly, again, I'm projecting into this, but might be about if Jay's looking for a job and what kind of safety planning might there be that way in terms of like, do I have to have my name on a website and some of those concerns that may go along with job searching as well as job acquisition. So those were two of the things that I noticed. And the one person mentioned also about using a vigor safety plan. And I don't know if Emil or Caleb, if you want to talk a little bit about that, if you're familiar.
Um, I don't think I know the Vigor acronym.
I was I'm blocking on it, so that's why I was kind of punting it back to y'all. Um,
Um,
if the person that made that in the
sure.
in the chat, I mean, please feel free to like expand on that. I think I remember what it is, but I don't remember what it stands for either. So
While we wait for that, Caleb, is there other stuff that you want to share we haven't talked about yet?
Yeah, I think the last thing that came up for me is just this um idea of coping strategies and how they like help with some things and then also can sometimes make other things worse. And when we've talked about this before, it was like a medication that has side effects that it might treat pain but might worsen other things. And so I'm thinking about like weed use that might help with chronic pain but worsen depression in some cases. Not always the case, but how it's difficult to disentangle those things and you can't just like stop using a coping mechanism that's really helpful in some cases. But one of those more longer term considerations around How are those coping strategies helping or hurting, and what other supports can be kind of under that also, so it's not just falling on one thing.
Um, I'm thinking about this conversation has felt like really easy and like affirming and supportive of Jay and everything in the chat. And I'm also thinking about how in real life, how many feelings we bring to situations, as the like advocate, staff person, professional, whatever our role is. Um, and how easy it is to like get annoyed when there's not a quick solution. And what I've seen happen in myself and basically every advocate I've ever met is like the more barriers that somebody faces, the more likely the advocate is at some point to get frustrated. And instead of being frustrated at the system and the world, um, we sometimes get frustrated at the survivor for being like, no, that won't work, that won't work, that won't work, that won't work, that won't work. Um, and I get how that happens neurologically, right? Like it it's often easier for our brains to like conceptualize being upset with the person in front of us, or you know we explain it away in a lot of ways, but like to really check in on ourselves and say and notice if I'm getting upset, if I'm trying to quick fix something, if I'm um, start making assumptions like Jay just isn't trying, or why won't they, whatever, whatever. I need to notice those so that I can continue to meet Jay with empathy, compassion, and an understanding for like the very real garbage they're going through, and that exists in the world, and just how like scary and violent the world is right now. See, and I see in the chat, we've got a link to the bigger safety plan. Thank you all. And some other resources. So Everywhere is Queer has job listings, Unfriendly Spaces. Um, yeah, and I think getting to know really like your local places. This is a national webinar, so it's so different. Every area of like what kind of jobs there might be is a really good other tip for folks. Any other stuff in the chat? Okay.
I think you caught most of it, and yeah, it's what's in the chat.
And Caleb, is this you or me?
I think this is me.
Great.
We're changing it up. Um, but we sort of wanted to look kind of in summary at these three ideas of patience, presence, and practice. And you all probably hear these coming through in different parts of what Emil and I are talking about, what you're seeing in the chat. Um, Kind of a summary of this specific case study, we're looking at patience, and so how shifting out of a feeling of stuckness can take a long time. That's not something that happens overnight. That's something, especially when there are so many systemic factors, it's not something that we can fix and that we can change right away. When we're looking at presence, how are we being with Jay? How are we being with this person? Meet the person where they are in terms of mood and tone. And part of that too, priorities, needs, what are the immediate concerns? What are more long-term concerns? And then lastly, this idea of practice is just taking small steps together. What are the small changes that could kind of cumulatively, I think that's how that what that word sounds like, make a difference in Jay's life.
Great. So that was our first scenario. Thank you all for everything in the chat, and Caleb for talking that through with me. Um, we want to take a 5-minute break for your brains and bodies. Please hydrate, stretch, look into the distance, take the speed nap, and we'll be back at 50 after the hour, so 2:50 Eastern time. And there's a quote on the screen from Gwendolyn Brooks. We are each other's harvest. We are each other's business. We are each other's magnitude and bond. All right. Welcome back. 5-minute breaks are nice. Let's go into the second scenario. Caleb, do you mind reading this?
Yes, this is our scenario from Diamond. He uses she, her pronouns. I'm just broken. I've tried everything to get help, but really I don't have any support. None of my friends want to hang out with me anymore. All of them say I'm not fun to be around and just drag them down. Fuck it. I can't be all cheery or put my head in the sand. I've been to therapy over the years and it was terrible. They didn't have any ways to help me. The one person that I told that I was thinking about suicide had been locked up. I'm still so upset about that. The hospital was terrible and traumatizing. I'm not going to a therapist again. They just betray me and don't get it at all.
Thank you. I'm going to stop the sharing of the scenarios in the chat. And Michael, do you want to get us started? We're going to go through for everyone basically the same question. So, how are trauma and culture possibly showing up, and what are kind of your first reactions?
Yeah. It's always funny, when I might have just frozen if when we write scenarios and when you listen to them, they're even more powerful sometimes. So I'm just taking a pause as we all listened to Caleb reading that, and some of my first impressions about how trauma and culture are showing up is just how many times trans people experience being institutionalized, seeking help, being harmed by when we do try to go seek help, and just how deep those wounds can be. And again, it's like kind of impact and intent and all of those words that we throw around a lot of times. But this is this real imaginary person who has tried to connect with other people, has ended up being really seriously, really harmed by others who are supposed to be helping. Um, so I see trauma coming in that way, just kind of like this is probably not her first experience with providers trying to be helpful and not being helpful. It's probably not her first experience being wounded in some way or hurt in some way. Um, it says a lot about the trauma and the culture of our mental health system that we would even think about institutionalizing somebody for being depressed or suicidal. Like, what does that say about the culture that we're living in, as well as trans culture, or pick the other kinds of culture that are specific to Diamond. The other ways that I'm seeing culture come in or trauma come in, is kind of the pervasiveness of fear, the superlativeness of nature. I'm never going to do this again. It's just, it's really black and white thinking of things, and that comes out so much more frequently when people have had a trauma response or when people have experienced deep levels of trauma. So just kind of that setup of like, nope, I'm not doing that ever again. And there's a lot to say with that, and like more power, to her. Of course, she wouldn't want to do that again where she was harmed. Some of the other ways that I think trauma and culture are showing up are just kind of the reminders to me about how much suicidal thought and action occurs within trans communities. Really high levels of depression and suicidal thoughts and feelings, for many good reasons, some of which have to do with being trans and trans in our world, not really to do with being trans, but trans in our world. And some may not have to do with that at all. So just kind of like looking at the reality of how hard it is in our world, for trans folks, and unfortunately how hard it is right now in the world for trans folks that might be different than it was 10 or 15 years ago. So that's a little bit of where I'm seeing trauma and culture. Where do you see it, Emil?
I mean, a lot of the same. And to add on the opening phrase of "I'm just broken," really sticks to me. Of like, who told you that? Where'd you learn that idea? And often it is somebody told us at some point in time, either directly or indirectly, that we are the problem, we are broken. Um, and maybe it's for being trans, maybe it's around race or another form of identity, maybe it's around mental health and well-being. Um, and a lot of mainstream psychology really pathologizes, particularly some diagnoses. So, borderline personality disorder, anything related to schizophrenia, anything related to, um, having different relationships to reality, like are just super pathologized, and like there is something. I do not think this, but mainstream therapists will imply there's something wrong with you, um, rather than we live in a world that doesn't create space for you to live in all of your complexities. Um, and again, thinking back to like intimate partner violence, abusive partners will also use somebody's, a diagnosis, whether it's self-diagnosis or not, or just conceptions around mental health and stereotypes, to control somebody and say, you're the problem, you can't be trusted, you like just all of this awful stuff about people. um so I see that showing up, and I'm curious where that came from, and when in Diamond's life. Is it something that happened as a kid? Is it something related to one of her identities? And then, like, how can we support, like, what if you're not what if you're not broken? Is that possible in this world? I think another thing around the isolation, when I hear none of my friends want to hang out with me, if they think I'm not fun or drag me down, I'm curious what sort of communities Diamond has. There, I think, depending where they live in the world, they may or may not have access to good social supports, where she lives in the world. But it, there are some communities that are more understanding of mental health and of like feeling bad, and or even of thinking about suicide, and create space for people who like are sad all the time or angry all of the time. And it's possible also that maybe Diamond doesn't have trans affirming friends, or doesn't have, all of these different aspects of culture. Like, does Diamond have people that affirm her identities, her cultural lens, her perception of the world, um, as as part of that? Um, so I think those are some things that really stand out to me in terms of ways culture and trauma can be showing up. And just again, want to echo, like, there's tons of research, as well as self-reported and academic research, showing that like involuntarily institutionalizing people does more harm than good. And I know I was brought up in a like peer support crisis line that was like, sometimes you got to make people go to the hospital. And I have since learned, like, that's that's a harmful way to think of things. And and when you listen to people's actual experiences, involuntarily institutionalizing people can be really, really harmful. And it can be really scary to be a person supporting someone and feel like you have very few options.
We move on to our second question about kind of like how would we initially respond? And Emil, do you want to start us off with kind of, if you were sitting with this person with Diamond?
Yeah, I would start, acknowledging and validating those feelings. I hear you. I hear the pain that you're in, and the harm that other people have done to you. Um, as kind of as soon as I felt was appropriate, like taking time to be sure that I listened, I heard, that Diamond had been able to share, I would want to share about my role and any limitations of it. I have been in jobs that have had really intense mandatory reporting rules. And if like that's something that might be impacting Diamond, if she tells me that she's currently thinking about suicide, she has the right to know that ASAP. If I'm in a role where don't have to ever call the police on somebody, I'm never going to do that. I want Diamond to know that. Um, if I know someone in the last scenario mentioned, crisis hotline versus long-term support, like kind of just really a brief synopsis of anything like that Diamond might want to know would be two of my first go-tos. What about you, Michael?
Yeah, I agree that I think we oftentimes are in different roles and are mandated by the state or by your agency to report. And I think being really transparent with Diamond from the very beginning, after we listen, like let's pay attention, let's be present. But that, in my opinion, needs to be one of those first things that come up, because whatever our role is, we can then reassure that we're not going to call the cops if that's what our role will allow. Um, but let me roll back a little bit before that piece, because I mean, if Diamond is coming into my office, if I'm an advocate, if I'm a mental health provider, if I'm in just about any role, and I hear that story, what I want to do first with Diamond is I want to make sure that I can listen fully. So I want to be able to sit down. I want to be able to meet Diamond eye to eye, whether that means eye contact or not, because I know sometimes people don't want to make eye contact, and that's totally cool. But I want to be literally at the same level, in my chair, or standing up, or if she wants to go for a walk. I want to let her take the lead on what we do and how she is literally embodying her space. And I will go with her if I can do that. If we need to step outside, if she needs to have a smoke, and we need to step outside for that. Part of listening, in my opinion, of like that first initial response, is to do whatever is possible to help her feel comfortable and safe, and help to build that rapport that says to her, like, hey, you are in charge here. You need to have a smoke, we're going to go have a smoke. If you need to move your body, we're going to go do that. Whatever it is, if you want to sit on the floor in my office, you sit on the floor in my office. Do you want me to sit with you on the floor? You're going to have to pick me up because I can't get up off the floor, but like, I will sit on the floor with you as well. So, I know that was a long answer to, like, what would I do initially? What would we do initially? But that helps lay the groundwork to then saying to her, hey, here's the mandatory reporting stuff or not. And if I don't have to report to anybody, if I can listen fully and just be with her, I will really strongly reinforce that. And I may need to reinforce that multiple times if she's had really traumatic experiences. She may not even hear it the first time or the first 5 times. She may not believe it. She may not believe it ever, but I can continue to reassure her of that if that feels valuable to take our time to reassure that. And like Emil said, I think like sharing kind of here's what I have to offer you. Here's my approach to working with people. You are in control. You can run the show here. Um, let's talk. Let's figure out what you need, or let's be in quiet, or whatever it is you need. So that's where I would start.
And do you want to add on to that? Our next question is, how might different roles support Diamond? So if you start from there, what are some different roles you're thinking about and the ways they could support?
Yeah. And for some of you who've been on a webinar before, you can see that I'm not in my normal place. And you can probably hear my dog. So my computer's a little bit frozen right now. Hang on just a second. So if we kind of imagine some different roles, when I was thinking about this scenario, I was thinking about many of the roles that you all are in here, which is, as an advocate who works with DV or SA survivors. And just kind of, I think sometimes we hear things as advocates when we work in a very specific role, and we might be surprised by what comes out. If the first thing isn't about talking about abuse or assault, sometimes we want to kind of get to that point and try to rush the conversation. So I think, if I was in the role of an advocate around SADV, it's like, how could I listen to what she's sharing and what she's talking about? And then if it was appropriate, if it felt comfortable and safe, to ask her, she talked about her friend circle and how they didn't want to hang out with her. Well, is there a way for me to ask, well, is somebody in your friend circle rejecting you as a power and control tactic? Are they trying to control who you have access to? To have that discussion, and if it doesn't go anywhere, that's okay. Um, if I put on a different hat, and if I kind of take on maybe a hat of a medical provider, so not a sexual assault nurse examiner, but mainstream mental health or mainstream physical health provider or community health center. Again, Emil and I both talked about mandatory reporting, and like, a lot of times in most states, I think almost every state, physicians, DOs, and things like that are mandatory reporters. So just being really clear with that up front. But there might be other things that I could do as a medical provider, like, listen and potentially offer some access to medication. Um, if she has access to me as a provider, that's really great. She might not have access to other mental health services or other psychiatric services that might have medications involved. So, could I play that role when I put that hat on? Some of the other things that I think about are, kind of like, is there a challenge around food or housing or logistical things? And how does that play out? Does she find more comfort in being alone or being with people? What are some housing options for that? What are some food options for that? What are some of the logistics? So like if she's coming with additional needs around basic needs, how can I listen to what she has to say about the nuance of those things? Not just like here, have the $10 gift card to McDonald's, but like, is it that you want to share a meal with somebody? Is that what's going to be emotionally supportive to you? Or do you want to be able to go sit in a park by yourself? So just, I mean, thinking through those things and really listening to what she needs um, when I'm in those roles would be where I would play things out. I mean, what roles did you think of that you want to bring forward?
Yeah, I mean, a primary role I think of is domestic violence or sexual violence advocates, and I know there's a ton of different roles we have at those organizations. But one thing is really thinking about how what Diamond has shared so far could influence anything else that we talk about. So if I am going to talk about safety planning, um, I'm doing that with an awareness that her trust in institutions and mental health providers has been broken, that she's already expressed a lot of um, you know having bad experiences at hospitals. So that may influence some of the options that that we brainstorm together. Um, we've she's shared a lack of social support, so that's going to be a part of it. Um, and again, an awareness of if she's in an abusive relationship currently, how the abuser may be adding to this, and and just making it all that much more difficult to navigate. Um, as a mental health provider, I, the first one of the first things that really stands out to me is my job is to demonstrate that I am trustworthy. Um, it's not to change Diamond to get Diamond to trust me. It's to um, step into what actions and behaviors will show to Diamond that I'm somebody that she can choose to trust should she choose to trust me at some point. Um, and and that may be long-term work, and that may be openly and honestly talking about the past negative experiences, asking what works. It may also be, getting away from talk therapy type practices and leaning into other, modalities or systems, helping connect Diamond with things like body-based therapy or arts therapy that may be helpful. Um, and I'm seeing, I'll bring in a couple things from the chat here. I see one about working as crisis mental health and emergency departments. The person suggests letting people know you know, therapists are people. We're not going to get along with all of them, just like we don't get along with every person. Um, and what I hear in that also is kind of like recognizing some of us are going to be in this like, we only have short-term interactions with Diamond. We are with her for the 45 minutes she's on a crisis hotline, or for the 3 hours she's in the emergency department, or whatever it is, we may never see Diamond again. So that role might look different than long-term supports. You may be giving more referrals. And in those cases, I want to be as clear as I can about what the referrals are to and what kind of to expect to them. Is this may be a good time to give like the Trans Lifeline has a list of worm lines that don't call the cops on people. So this is explicitly phone numbers you can call and they will not try to find you. They will not call the cops and you can talk about suicide. That may be a resource that I want to be really clear about versus, okay, I'm going to see you again tomorrow. And so we get to keep talking about it, has different roles. And then I just want to shout it out so that it's in the recording. Mandatory reporting is not neutral is a great resource to learn more about mandatory reporting laws and why they can be so harmful for folks. So offering that.
I wanted to add to that, along the lines of mandatory reporting, we had some guest speakers a year ago, maybe it was, to who did a webinar on mandatory reporting, which is just fantastic. So if you're looking for other kind of video-based resources, that was, I think it's a really interesting thing to watch with your staff or coworkers, and have some conversation about it. And to circle back, Emil, to what you said about like, the hotlines that don't call law enforcement. I think a lot of us don't know that. A lot of us are, have always believed, oh, you call a hotline and it's confidential and it's private. But the majority, if people end up sharing certain things, will end up making a call to law enforcement, which, we've already talked about is really, really dangerous and damaging for a lot of folks. So even things like 988 or 211 or some of the things that are really widely available that everybody, hears in the grand world of things is safe, may not be so safe. So just having some additional knowledge for you as a provider, and knowing who's on your referral list, if you refer folks out to things, is really important. So that sounded preachy. I didn't mean to be preachy, but like, I didn't know about a lot of these things for a long time either. And it's like, I think that there's so much stuff to learn right now that, that's one of those things that I think a lot of people just assume that it's safe, it's okay, nobody's going to call the cops. So should we
I think
move on? Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead, Emil.
Yeah, I was going to say this is a good segue into long-term supports.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing, in the chat too, someone sharing, offering friendship, and sharing a meal, accompaniment, having something nice together. And this person was also clear that, giving that genuine connection in a way that respects boundaries and are clear about boundaries. And that may be really different if you're doing that as a community member versus as a professional. Um, and I do think as professionals, we can still listen. If we're working with Diamond long term, we can still like listen to some of Diamond's interests and help build some of those social bridges in ways that don't cross a line or feel I don't know, problematic or invasive around power dynamics, helping connect people, um, yeah, listening, other long-term supports. Again, I think about suicide as something that a lot of people think about for long, long periods of times, if not most of their life. Some people will think about suicide, have suicidal ideation throughout their lifetime. And it's just not something that goes away. And I was really brought up to be in the like quick fix mindset of like, if somebody's thinking about suicide, it is an immediate crisis and we get them to a hospital, they go for a week and then they're okay. That's not what it's like. Um, I mean, there's maybe a small number of people that it's like that for, but really preparing to be present and to have conversations about death and suicide with this person in a way that are not stigmatizing, aren't making it a crisis or an emergency when it's not, and allow Diamond to talk about it, and for you to be present with that. And that takes a lot of inner work to be ready to be present with conversations about death. Um, so that's one of the big things I'm thinking about, is doing our own work so that we don't try to fix things that don't need to be fixed. You know, Diamond's not broken. People aren't broken. Um, and to be able to like be present with that. What about you, Michael? Other long-term things?
Yeah, this may or may not be a long-term thing, but as I've been listening, I was thinking about, my psych degree. We were always talking about brief solution-focused therapy. And I think that our world is set up in that way of like, how can we fix it? What can we do? What action do we need to take? Rather than how do we need to be in the world? How can we be present? Rather than making suggestions or finding suggestions or saying what's right or what's wrong about things. I think so for me, it's about a culture change of how do we think about how we're training psychologists? How do we think about, what do we think when we train even crisis workers? Do we help the helpers be able to be present, to be able to sit with somebody? And so that's not maybe a longer term solution around Diamond right there, right now, but it is a longer term solution to this systemic problem of quick answers, or you should just be happy, or some of the phrases that a lot of us heard growing up and a lot of us hear as adults. How can we start to reshape that so it's okay for people to be depressed? It's okay for people to be suicidal. If they don't want to be, that's not a great thing, and we can try to help folks not be those in those places that feel so painful. But it is inherently okay to be in those spaces and to have somebody be with you in those spaces. So when I think about long term, I was thinking, Emil, as you were talking about this therapist that I knew a long time ago, and she had a private practice that was on kind of like this parkway with lots of trees and a railroad track that went by it. And her client was really, really depressed and oftentimes suicidal and really, really lonely. And her client, what they wanted most was to have somebody to have lunch with. So they scheduled their therapy appointments at noon or 1 o'clock, and the two of them went out and they ate a brown bag lunch together outside by the railroad tracks, by the trees. So they had a therapy session. It was being paid. It was all, proper for therapy, but it got the client what they needed. And so it's like that kind of long-term solution of like being creative with clients, whether you're an advocate or a therapist or whatever your role is, there's almost always a way to find a solution that's going to work for that client and for your own ethics or needs or parameters or your organization that you work for. So those are some of the things that I think of. And again, some of those are not long term, but kind of the long term thinking and the long term systemic change, I think, is really super important. Yeah. I mean, what else comes up for you in the scenario, or what else has come up in the chat that you want to bring forward?
Yeah, one thing in the chat, someone mentions being a hairstylist, and feeling limited to help in that capacity, but being able to, have openness about their own mental health and a judgment-free space. And, I think that we often um, undervalue kind of that, like just having somebody who's like, yeah, I'm here and I'm listening to you, and we have a connection for, again, 45 minutes or 6 hours. I don't know what, depending on what kind of hairstyle you're doing, and that can be really useful. And these sometimes one time, sometimes once a month or once every 6 month interactions, um, are just a soothing place to be. Um, And I think also, just again, there's like this ability to take it slow. That there there may not be quick fixes, but we can again kind of like, right now, I don't know what Diamond's goals are, but once we talk through that and what Diamond is looking for and wants, we can work slowly towards them, and take small steps that feel feasible. Caleb, is there anything we missed in the chat or anything you want to bring in?
I think you've covered a lot of it. I mean, I think there's this general conversation about how difficult it is to know if a therapist or mental health provider will be supportive and kind of the value put on referring people to mental health support as a provider in a different field, and how that can sometimes cause more harm than good if we don't know who those providers are, what kinds of um, support they might offer or not offer. Um, a lot of that mandatory support or mandatory reporting conversation you've already brought in, which is really fantastic.
Michael, I think these are yours.
They are. So as we kind of wrap up this case, we wanted to kind of do the same thing of like, let's look at three possible core skills that we could get out of each of these angles. And I just want to be really clear. These are just like one option under each of these columns. So for patients, can we not rush to refer people out to other people? She picked you for a reason, and she's sitting with you. She is with you for a reason. So because of that and because of the other trust issues that she might have had in the past, the other harm she might have done, how can we be patient and not refer out when she might want to be with you, with us? For presence, it's really, really hard when people are suicidal and people have strong emotions or big emotions. And so as providers, as friends, as hairstylists, as the people that are listening, can we stay calm? And can we get grounded and know what our limits are about talking about suicide? Can we bring in our guides, whether they're spiritual guides, or can we, get the connection and support that we need so that we can be present for her, or do the best thing for her with her. And then around practice, when making action plans, if that becomes a part of that discussion to make action plans, again, how can the focus be on manageable goals, things that are not going to be overwhelming? So again, kind of those little small chunks of goals when we work with somebody. So those are three options for the patient's practice and presence. Flip those all around. And we're going to take another 5-minute break so that people can kind of refresh. Maybe, yeah, can we do maybe a 3-minute break instead of a 5-minute break since we're running a little bit? I'm trying to do the math. Emily, do we have time for 5?
Yeah, we have time for 5.
Let's do 5. So it's 22 minutes after the hour. So that would be 27 minutes after the hour. And we'll leave this nice slide up. It's one of our social media posts that's just so simple of like every survivor deserves to feel respected and whole. So let's take 5 minutes and we'll be back for number 3.
Welcome back. And we've got one last scenario to talk through. Caleb.
This is our scenario with Mia, who uses they, them pronouns. My support group just closed down with no fucking notice at all. What the fuck? Like, where are we supposed to go? What are we supposed to do? The government wants us all dead. They were like the only place that I could trust not to get me added to any watch lists for being trans and autistic. It's so fucked up, and I don't want to live in a world that hates us so much. No one cares. The world is so messed up. There are wars and hunger and poverty, and people without homes, and kids who can't go to school, and people can't access healthcare, or not have people shooting guns everywhere. I probably shouldn't even be complaining because it's so much worse for other people, but I'm so scared and so mad all the time. Fuck, I don't even know why I'm reaching out to you.
And before we jump into the questions, I just invite people to breathe or notice your bodies for a second. And I'm going to turn off the share. Caleb, do you want to get us started with that?
Yeah, so we're looking at that first question. Oh, Michael already put it in the chat. Thank you. About how are trauma and culture possibly showing up and what do you notice? For me, I think the first thing that stands out is around this overlap of trans and autistic communities and how much, just how many folks are in both of those communities. and those very justified fears of being targeted for both of those identities, and especially the ways they overlap. And I know, Emil, you'll talk a little bit more about kind of like where those specific fears about a watch list are coming from, um, and fears around not having safety or privacy in most spaces, except for this one specific support group for Mia. Um, I see like our first scenario with Jay, just a lot of overwhelm with what's happening in the world, and how that contributes to these individual fears. So the big picture issues get very individualized too. Um, and one cultural factor I'm thinking about is how when we have these marginalized identities and our social groups are kind of focused around them, like if, in this support group that's specifically trans focused, that kind of becomes some of the main topics we're talking about and hearing about around people's fears and trauma, which are very real things and important places to have a space for that. Um, it's sounding to me like this is Mia's main source of social support because losing that is really scary. And that probably also means that they're very frequently being, kind of receiving similar messages and similar anxiety and fear, um, which again is real. And it becomes kind of this constant stream that's hard to take in, especially when we don't have other places to put that or other messages that we're also receiving.
Caleb, to build off of that too, I think that like, you're right. Like when we kind of hang out, whether it's professionally or socially or in a support group with people who are like us, who are getting the same messages, sometimes it just amplifies that message. Again, it's real, but it might kind of blow it really big. And we might not get other input about other things that might be more calming or help us be more adaptive. So, I mean, like those spaces can be really useful, but they can also just kind of, blossom some of what's hard about the world rather than maybe what's good about the world or what we can try to do to not be so overwhelmed. One of the things that I see here and comes out really strongly for me, maybe this is my own history, but just kind of the survivor guilt kind of nature of it. Like, well, other people have it so much worse than I do. So like they're coming in because they really want to be able to get support and help or whatever they want to get from who you are as a provider. But they're also feeling like, hey, my stuff doesn't matter so much because everybody else has it worse. So I definitely see that as a trauma piece coming forward. Um, and it just, the way the voices in this, it just, yeah, I just on a kind of a visceral level think and feel like, oh my God, you've experienced so much, you're carrying so much with you, the weight of the world as well as your own history of trauma, even though I don't know what that is yet. It just comes out in the language that this person is using. Mel, what do you think?
I hear Mia say this and I'm just like, yeah. So maybe I'm in those bubbles where we're like reinforcing all of the bad things. Um, yeah, I mean, I think it can feel really overwhelming to respond when like the world is so messed up and somebody is, naming that. It's like there are very few roles in which we address that and make those changes. So the sort of like professional way to phrase that is like, I really hear this pain and really validate it. Um, and I did want to do the kind of like, what is this watch list stuff? There has been a lot of talk from the federal government and non-government places of creating, both lists of like trans folks and folks with autism, as well as potentially with like lots of other mental health diagnoses, like and labels there have been cases of some governments trying to get lists of everyone who's been seen for trans affirming care, been seen who has this diagnostic code. um there was a talk from someone in the federal government of like basically rounding up anybody with a mental health diagnosis or disorder and putting them in camps. So like this is a threat. This is something that people are threatening to do, particularly and especially targeting trans folks and neurodivergent folks. And there's been an emphasis within neurodivergence on targeting autism specifically. So what's happening is that very understandably, a lot of people are like, I don't want any of this on my medical records. So a lot of people are choosing not to pursue formal diagnoses around autism or ADHD or other types of neurodivergence or mental health stuff right now, mental health being different than neurodivergence, but like because there's such vagueness in these policies. So people are thinking like, well, the government's looking at accessing electronic health records, et cetera. So I don't want this in any of my paperwork. And yeah, that's like the background. And so I think a cultural piece I think about is like, I, I know that. So if Mia's talking to like literally me, I'm like, yes, scary. Um, But I mean, even with what I know, I don't know all of the details. I don't know everything. Um, there's a ton I don't know. And often we are working with survivors who are going through stuff that like we're not aware of. So I think there's this cultural piece of our work as professionals is to stay informed on like a lot of different stuff or know where to get information when somebody comes up to you and is like afraid of watch lists, is to learn more about that fear without putting more burden on Mia to teach us, but like also being able to meet Mia in that present moment. And that's a delicate act of doing. So those, I think those are the big things. And um, just really thinking that we like don't want to pathologize. Yeah, I think that often is something that happens when somebody is angry or, you know, in a lot of distress is that they're they get labeled the problem.
That's a really good segue too, to like how do you initially respond? And I think I'm starting the answer to this one,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, it's like, well, when people say fuck, when people say, you know, swear words, that can be really off-putting to some people. Doesn't have to be, right? We've all heard those words. But sometimes those big emotions and the big feelings and the big words or the little words make providers feel like, holy shit, I can't deal with this, or you need to calm down, or, you know, some of those responses that are not helpful in the moment for somebody who's having big emotions. So, you know, so how would I initially respond? How would somebody in a helper role initially respond? You know, and again, I feel like I always sound like a broken record of like, I want to listen, listen, listen. I want to make eye contact if even if they don't want to, I'm going to be available to make eye contact. I'm going to be aware of what my body language is. I'm not going to be all tense up if they swear, or have big emotions, but I can lean in with them, and listen with them with a whole heart and an open brain and open feelings. Um, I can make sure that they feel safe within the space that we're in. If they need to be loud and we're in an office where it doesn't feel like that's a good thing or a safe thing to be loud, can we step outside? Can we, you know, go to someplace else where they can be loud if that's what they need, or if they need to throw things, or, you know, can we find a place that feels safe for their emotions, in the moment? Um, I also I think that some of the things that we can do is pick up on the themes of what's talked about. So, you know, they mentioned hunger and poverty and homelessness and healthcare and gun violence. And they were talking about it as other people, but are those the issues that are affecting their personal life too? So, if and when we get circled back to what their needs are, I'm going to be aware of what those things are that they mentioned, because they could be talking about a lot of different things that are happening in the world. Those are the things that they mentioned. So are they relevant to their experience? Emil, what are your thoughts, kind of those initial responses?
Um, wow, that just took all thoughts out of my brain.
Oops.
No, it's okay. Um, I, I keep thinking about, I have this like line I always say, like, talk to somebody like a cashier or something, they're like, can't complain. I'm like, you can always complain. Um, and I think some version of honoring that to Mia is something that comes up to me of like, you, that's what we're here for, is like, this is a place where you can vent, you can process, you can complain. It does not matter if people have it worse or not, and who even gets to decide what that looks like. Um, and I think this goes a little bit into like what are our different roles, but picking up on that, like I don't know why I'm reaching out to you. At some point I might check in and say, like, do you want me to tell you a little bit about what we do here? And that can be true kind of across different professions, but I think has been really common when I've worked on crisis hotlines and at like domestic violence centers is folks don't have a good understanding of like what all the different services are. And often we want to adapt our services to what people need, but sometimes it's helpful to just have a starting place. Like some of the things we offer are support groups, one-on-one advocacy, safety planning, help finding different resources that exist, someone to talk to and vent with. Um, do any of those sound like something you'd like? So that's one piece I'd pull in. Caleb, what about you?
One of the things I noticed was this piece of like, I don't even know why I'm reaching out, or I don't know if I should reach out. And I think my first response would be affirming, like, yes, you like it's okay for you to reach out, even if you don't know what you're looking for, or like what kind of support you need. And maybe they do, but just don't feel like they themselves are deserving of it. So I would like very explicitly affirm that. Um, and then I think with all of these scenarios, it's that overwhelm that all of this is so much, and there's no, one individual person can't fix that in this moment, and just kind of sitting with that and acknowledging the how big that is. Um, One of the main things I'm also hearing is around the importance of these social circles and the support group, and that was clearly very important to Mia. Um, And this might get more into long-term solutions, but I'm thinking about, are there ways to maintain connections with people from the group if that's just ended? Um, that was a very important part of their life. Are people still in touch in this moment? Are there ways to keep those connections going? Um, and then one thing kind of bringing in our last conversation around suicide is there, a couple of mentions of like, I don't want to live in this world that's so, horrible. Is that something to check in about, not to stigmatize or like, I don't know, blow out of proportion or something, but just to gently check in about if there's more going on there that Mia could use support for.
And this is a good place. I want to bring in some things from the chat. Um, you know, again, echoing the like, let people know they're not alone. This is a safe place to express yourself however you want, um, to drop that mask. One person shares if they hadn't done so already, sharing their own identities, so trans identity, self-diagnosis around autism, things like that. And yeah, I think that that's another one of those places where like years ago I got taught these like very rigid, don't ever talk about yourself, don't share your own stuff. And I just, there are times and places where we don't want to share, right? Personal decision, you're a super private person, I'm a super private person, safety reasons, etc. But there are also like ways that, that sharing can be helpful and create um, that common understanding of like, here's how I can relate, or here's how I have some overlapping interests, similar fights, similar struggles with you. Um, Echoing the tell me more about that, the really open invitation to just like keep sharing and expressing themselves. Um, One person shares also sharing, noticing motion, noticing, more than just words, um, and doing our own emotional regulation. And then this final comment, y'all are so great. I love these comments. Um, the overwhelm is hitting all of our staff members as well. So we have a lot of discussions around this topic, including how it affects specific groups of people. Yeah, I mean, I think y'all all heard me say like my reaction to this scenario is like, yep. It's the overwhelm is so real and it's impacting us too. So continuing to notice and check in on that is so important.
Let me add two really quick things to the what's in the chat. One is, Emil, off of what you kind of talked about, which was like, when do we self-disclose, or is it safe for us to self-disclose, or do we want to, or are we private? A lot of us may work in places that, or in states that it's not cool to be out as trans or out as pick an identity that's being targeted right now. But I think, if we want kind of maybe a half measure, it's like, I've worked with a lot of trans people before, or something that affirms like, I know something. I might not say I'm trans, but like I've worked with a lot of trans people, and that might be enough of a bridge that keeps us safe if we feel the need to not disclose, and help other people feel more seen and heard. The other thing, about emotional regulation, people sometimes talk about co-regulation instead of emotional regulation, and we could spend a whole, many, many, many webinars talking about that. But that's not something that a professional has to do, but we can kind of co-regulate with people. We can kind of pick up on their emotions and figure out if there are ways that we can be harmonic with them, and possibly help regulate in different ways without being a jerk and telling people how they should emotionally regulate. So um, just a couple of comments on the comments. Should we move on to looking at different roles, which we've kind of already talked about a little bit, but are there more things about different roles?
I want to continue on this piece about regulation. One way to think about regulation that I read recently was uh, instead of like trying to control your emotion, it's like having your body and your emotions more match. And and so the goal of regulation isn't calm down, right? Like which I think unfortunately is often like a mainstream pop psychology myth of like just breathe and take a second, but it's giving our nervous system a chance to take care of itself. And sometimes that means our bodies and our emotions matching. So it can look a lot of different ways, and it's okay to be angry and to stay in anger for a while if that's what this person wants or needs. And that a lot of again like pop psychology regulation stuff is for neurotypical people and not for trans folks. And so just having a wide variety of tools in your pocket can be really helpful so that um, like box breathing, where you breathe for, hold for, breathe out for, hold for, isn't going to work for everybody. Um, may have for all sorts of reasons. Maybe it's easier to just do like a longer exhale than your inhale, or to not do something that's breath focused, to do something that's focused on a different sense, to create space for like stimming and other tools that person has for like regulating themselves already. And those are things that can be done by basically any type of provider. Um, yeah. Caleb, do you want to add in there, or Michael?
It
Michael, I
makes me
think you had more ideas than I did about different
I was gonna say, this
You
makes
go
me think
ahead.
about so many things. I mean, I know I mentioned before, like, therapists that are willing to go outside with people rather than sitting in their office. It's like, if you're a therapist and you have access to a freezer and a whole bunch of ice, a great way for a lot of people to get out some of those feelings and match their feelings with their body is to like throw ice on the pavement. If that's a possibility for you as a friend, as a body worker, as a therapist, as a whoever, or have Play-Doh that people can squish and be really physical with. Like sometimes we need to encourage those things, not encourage, sorry, make space for those feelings and how our bodies want to process those feelings. So, and there are things that we don't get taught in how we learn to do our professional work. So, I think part of our job here at Forge is to to help remind us all, like, we can do this work differently in a way that's going to support survivors and real people who have real emotions and, real stuff going on. And it's not going to fit into that box breathing or calm down or let's sit down. That doesn't always work. Doesn't always work. And it's really beautiful if we can honor something different. Yeah.
Mm, I think that leads us towards long-term supports that we can offer. And my first thought on this was actually not for Mia specifically, but for us in our organizations, is to think about our role in systems change work. What can our organization or agency, if we work at one, do to fill the gaps in services? Like, um, there's so much going on. We didn't even fully address, like, LGBT centers, other organizations are shutting down with zero notice. People are losing their jobs, people are losing their support groups, they're losing their physical community spaces with zero notice. Um, Doctors are moving, like, all these things are happening. So our agencies that are still there, how can we fill these gaps? Do we need to look at new support groups? Do we need to make sure that we are 20 million times better trained to support trans folks than we were before? Do better outreach? Um, do we want to also, like, do things like updating our forms and our paperwork so that we're not documenting information that can be used against people? If it's possible, the government can get hold of it. We want it to be safe for anyone we're working with. Um, I can also look at, like, investing in community, volunteering with mutual aid efforts, building lots of these more community-based systems and support. Um, and I while it's not, like, necessarily of direct benefit to Mia, I think that uh, a lot of folks who are, like, kind of justice and community minded benefit from knowing that the organizations they're going to for help are also invested in their community, and care about similar things. So that can be a benefit. Um, and then for Mia in specific, doing that slow work of, like, what needs are priorities for her, for them, um, and and building that over time, like we've talked about with everybody else. Anything, Michael or Caleb, y'all want to add on long-term supports or anything else for?
One thing I'm thinking of is this, like, a lot of what Mia talks about is it's the overwhelm of everything that's happening in the world, but also I think a deep care for everything that's happening in the world and ways that it impacts other people. And so I wonder about social connections and forms of being involved in activism, in protests, in direct action, and supporting other people that might feel more empowering or give a sense of being involved. That's not an option for everyone. There are a lot of reasons why that might not work for Mia or for other folks, but um, even small ways of, like, letter writing, making phone calls, things like that, that might add a little bit of that sense of I'm participating and I'm doing something in response to all of these different harms that are happening in the world. Um, so that's one thing I'm thinking of, in addition to building the long-term social connections that are not just within that one support group.
The only thing I wanted to add to this, and y'all have said, so many of the really important things, is when we look at, like, multidisciplinary groups. I think a lot of us who have worked in sexual assault or domestic violence have a kind of an idea of what that looks like or who's involved in it. And I think as our world changes, if we look at something that's multidisciplinary or cross community or not in those traditional models, I think we're a lot of communities are seeing that there is support in places that they didn't used to see support. So like an example of that I'm seeing a lot is, faith-based communities that are stepping up, moving forward, and really caring about trans folks, really caring about issues that a lot of us were taught as kids of like, oh, those religious people, they're like not good to trans people. Well, you know what? There's a lot of religious folks or a lot of spiritual folks that really are. So like, where and how can we cross the boundaries that might have been there before and work with the people who really care and want to make a difference, whether that's like Caleb through activism, whether it's through mental health spaces, whether it's someplace to sleep for folks. There's a lot of ways that we can look at multidisciplinary or cross-disciplinary support that works within communities and works across different things. So I would encourage us to think about those things as we look long term. I know we have 5 minutes left, so Emil, do you wanna pull us into
Is
our
this? Yeah. Um, so just kind of our summary here. Patience is taking that time to listen to the global and wide-reaching concerns. You don't brush those off as separate or not connected to what this person needs or what your role and job is. Presence, affirmation, validation. Things are hard. They're bad and scary things happening. We can affirm and acknowledge that. And then practice working together to identify their priorities and action steps, if any. And really want to emphasize that together here. We've heard from this person a need for community and a need for connection. So we can kind of co-create that without telling them what their priorities need to be and without, just making them come up with them out of thin air if they don't have them already. Um, And we just wanted to close. We don't have a final 5 minute break because we only have 5 minutes left, but I'd invite people to, do something with your body or your brain or your breath to regulate, to maybe move yourself out of this. I like to shake. I Yeah, the Taylor Swift "Shake It Off" is like always in my head. Um, Whatever your thoughts on Taylor Swift, that's a longer conversation. But yeah, shaking it off can be a great tool for you. And have this quote from one of our blog posts, which I guess I wrote. So this quote from me, you didn't do that on purpose. Maybe we don't always have to be trying to get better. So I just want to emphasize we can meet people where they are. We can be where we are. Not everything has to be fixed and healed. And I saw someone mention rest is resistance um, in the chat. So really highlight that. Um, and if folks have any questions or things you want to add that weren't brought up, now is your chance to do that. And while you are doing that in the chat, I will just share, here's our contact information. You can reach us and our dogs at these email addresses. And Forge is on the socials. We are on Blue Sky as well. That's not on here. And then you've maybe seen our website. We also have a blog, transsurvivors.com, that has lots of great stuff on it. And thank you so much. May your day be filled with kittens if you're not allergic to kittens. Um, and we just really appreciate y'all. I have so much gratitude for everything that got shared in the chat and for everybody who was here participating through listening and other methods like that. We will send you an evaluation and a follow-up email tomorrow. So please do fill out that evaluation when you get it. I think it'll pop up on your screen when this closes as well. That helps us do what we do better. And we just greatly appreciate y'all. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.